Yeah, we are live.
Okay, hello everyone. Good evening. Welcome to a front-end JavaScript class. So today we're going to talk about the DOM. Um, as a preface to every other thing I'm going to say, first off, first preface will be my name, and my name is Johnson. Um, my name is Johnson Obaizon, and you could find me on Workspace with Grandmaster handle. Should you have any questions after this class? So, what's more? So let's get right to it. So one thing I want to say as a preface before I get started is that uh, this would be especially useful as a class for beginners. I know that some of you in this program aren't exactly beginners. So for beginners, this would help you to connect the dots of uh, so many of the things you've learned before now. For example, some of you are maybe you before this program, before the training, at the beginning of training, you were a complete beginner, so you came in contact with HTML and CSS and JavaScript, and for you it's clear what HTML does and it's clear what CSS does, but it's not so clear about JavaScript. It's not, you know, um, you don't fully get where JavaScript comes in exactly. So if you're in that group, this class will be useful for you. Um, Even if you're not, just stay tuned and we'll see how much you can learn today. So the DOM, as an intro, it just means it's an abbreviation for document object model, and the document being referred to here basically is your HTML document, right? The HTML document is like a tree. Okay, let me share my screen so that I can illustrate this. All right. So if you can see my screen, you see I have a HTML document set up here, and see what I mean by it's a tree. For example, look at the body element. You see that the body element starts from the beginning of this tag and ends there. It has a child called div, and it's possible for the div inside to have maybe, let's say, button, a child, a button child, and it's still possible for the button to also have a maybe span child that will have an image child, right? So you see that is a tree because it contain branches that would contain other branches that contain other branches, to an infinity, just a tree. So JavaScript, the DOM, the idea behind the DOM is JavaScript. We want to be able to use JavaScript to interact with this tree, right? And so JavaScript has uh, superpowers, and by that I mean JavaScript can actually do all of the things I just did. You can use it to insert elements wherever you want. You can use it to change attributes, change the text in an element, change the styling. That's add CSS basically to the elements. You can change the attributes of the elements, like maybe give it a class, give it an ID, give it whatever thing. You can do a lot of things with JavaScript. That's superpowers. You can use it to almost replace the HTML and the JavaScript and the CSS. You can play the parts of these two, right? So for some of you up to this point, what you mainly do right now is if you do, maybe let's say you perform a calculation with JavaScript, you simply log it to the console, right? If you maybe you write a function that calculates the average, let me write such a function right now. Must calculate. Oh, let me just call it average. Oh, what's an even simpler sum? Second, and you could go console log first, or let me put this in a variable first. Let's call it output first or second, right? And then you want to console log the results so that you can see whether it actually worked, something like that. So you're used to consoling to logging your output through the console so that you can actually see if your JavaScript works. But the primary way in the industry, the primary way you're going to actually show your JavaScript output is in the HTML. No user is going to be going in the console to um, see maybe the result of what he just did. They will look at the HTML page and you are expected to show the output of maybe any calculations or whatever you do there so the user can see it. So the DOM allows you to do that. The DOM gives JavaScript the abilities to edit a HTML document, basically. So let's dive into that. So let me get rid of all of this. I'll still leave this my div some with an ID, some div. So each JavaScript element, sorry, each JavaScript file has especially front-end JavaScript file. You know, JavaScript can also be written at the back end, but each JavaScript file, when you're writing front-end code, has access to an object called the document object. So we're going to focus mainly on that object, right? If you use your VS Code and you type documents, you press dot, you see the IntelliSense listing a whole lot of functions, and there are a lot of them. Functions and attributes that are things that you can do with the document object. There are a lot of them. I can't attempt to start explaining all of them or explaining even some. We're just going to talk about the ones that have to do with DOM. Not all of them have to do with DOM. Right? So the most popular DOM function that you see out there will be get elements by ID. This is used a lot. So what it can help you to do is if you have an existing element uh, in your document, right, and it has an ID, you can uh, gain access to that element using get element by ID. Mind you, I've already imported this script into the HTML document. None of these will work if the script was not imported, right? I should hope that should be obvious by now. Okay, so get element by ID is a function, and you're supposed to pass the ID string. Here, I gave the div some ID. That's the ID. So let's go some ID. So um, let me save this to a variable, to a constant actually. So element. All right. Now, if you run my code and you see that here is empty, there is nothing to see, and it should be obvious why there is nothing to see. We only have one div element, and the div does not have anything, right? If let me call this div content. Let me give it some text. So div content. You see that you can now see some text that says div content. right? So that works. Now let me remove this. I want to do something. I want to use JavaScript to add this content. You can easily do this. Um, so you can go element dot text content. All right. So you can see there is no content in the HTML, but I'm able to add that using JavaScript. So it's really as simple as that. Anything I assign to the text content would the text content property of an element, it will be given to the element as a text, right? It's as simple as that. Now you can go even further than that. If you decide what you want to add is not really, you don't want to add a, you don't want to add text. Maybe you want to add another element that will maybe have another element that will finally have text or something like that. You can go ahead and go element. Okay, let's create a new element. Document also has powers to do that, to create any element in the world. Basically can create anything. So let's create a button, since that one is a little obvious. Button. We want this button to be a child of our div. That is, it to be basically the same thing as putting a button here. Let's say we have a button here that says click, right? So if I save, well, let me get rid of this. All right, so you can see our div has a button that says click me. Or maybe let me style this so that it looks a little more obvious what we are doing. Um, um, some ID. Right. So let me use the some ID as a selector, and I want to give it padding, so that let's say one rem, and let's say margin to one. Maybe I could increase this a little. There, what am I doing? Some ID. And I want to give it a background color so we know where it starts and where it ends, so that's easy to see. All right, cool. So you can see our div, our green div has a button inside it, right? That says click me. Now I could decide, let me get rid of the button and try and create it using JavaScript. So you see there's no more button since I removed it in the HTML. Now, well, let me create it using the using JavaScript, using the DOM basically. So you got document dot create element, right? And then as what you pass in is the name of the element you want to create. You can see VS Code IntelliSense is suggesting a bunch of element names. You see A for anchor, you see ABBR address. Some of these are not so maybe popular with you guys. We have article, aside, audio, and we're looking for button, obviously. So button. So this creates, that means this variable is now, yeah, it actually holds reference now to a button, right? So let me give that button the text. You remember how to do that? Text content was click me. Let's put JS here so that this is not a junior button. So once now this button exists, but it is not part of the web page yet because I've not added it to any element. So it's just hanging there, kind of in thin air. So if you want to see the button, you need to add it to the div. Thankfully, I already have a reference to the div element. I saved it to element. So what I can do is element. So each element has a function known as append child. Append child. And then you pass in the child that you want to append. So I want button to become a child of this div now. So button. So append this button. So I'm appending basically a button that has test content of click me JS, whatever that means. Okay, so you can see my button is now part of what is part of the page, right? Despite the fact I didn't have anything here. Now, I said earlier that JavaScript can also do the job of your index, your CSS files as well. So I can actually style this button using without changing my CSS. I can still, you know what? Let me get rid of all of these styles. Let me just do all of that. You can see my style is gone, but I could add that using CSS. So let's see how we can do that. Element dot style dot background color. Right? Anything I assign to this would be treated as a background color, right? So I want sky blue, and I want to give it if I give it some okay, I gave it some styling earlier. I gave it a padding, so let me do that again. Element dot pad, sorry, style padding. I think I gave it 2 rand or something. So let's do that again. So now when I save, you can see that the styles are applied, despite the fact that I don't really have it in my CSS file, right? My JavaScript, I'm adding elements, I'm styling those elements. I could give this button some, button doesn't look very good, so I could do a lot of things with it using JavaScript. I could go button dot style dot what let's say padding. Padding is always good. Pro tip 0 point, and you can what you put inside this quotes for the string is the way you type it in CSS, since you're passing a string. So you can go 0.4 rand, 1.2 rand. So you can see my button now has a proper padding. I could since I don't like buttons that don't have the correct cursor type, so I could still go button dot style dot cursor. I want it to be pointer. So you can see now is a pointer and it's very nice. So you can do a lot of other things. You can give it a shadow. Well, all the things you can do inside CSS, you can do inside this JavaScript, right? You can decide you want to add an image, maybe an icon to the button. Is will still work perfectly well with JS. And this is basically the idea. Eventually, most of you guys, if not all of you, front end trainees, you go on to learn JavaScript frameworks, right? You probably learn React, or you learn Vue, or you learn Angular, you learn Ember, you learn a few of other ones. You can learn either of them, or you can learn all of them. Who knows? And this behind the hood is actually what they do. They are JavaScript frameworks that used to build web pages. When you're making changes, most of the times to a HTML file, you just be writing all your code inside your CSS. You put all your code in, sorry, inside your JavaScript, right? And the code that you write in the JavaScript will actually make up for all the code that you didn't write in the HTML and CSS, right? You inside the JavaScript, inside the JavaScript files, you actually specify your markup, you specify your styling. Under the hood, they're actually accessing your DOM, accessing your web page through the DOM and making all those changes for you without you having to write HTML manually or write CSS. So that's actually how React works. That's actually a very simplified explanation of how it works. That it uses the DOM to access your HTML file and change it without you manually changing your HTML or manually changing your CSS. All you have to do is change the JavaScript, and JavaScript has a superpowers, so you can actually make all the changes you want. Okay, cool. So now there are some other functions that um this the document object affords us that have to do with the DOM. Um, Let me get rid of all of these. We were able to find an element using get element by ID. That's document dot get element by ID. So there are a lot of other ways to find a document. Assuming you are not in the mood to be giving IDs to all your elements. Every element will have an ID because you want to be able to access it using JavaScript. You don't have to give the IDs. You can still find those elements even if um they don't have IDs, right? For example, let me not give this an ID anymore. Let me give it let me give it a class. Let me call it parents. Let's have another div for no reason. Let's call it subparent. And then we'll now have a final div called child. And then let's have a paragraph called parents. And a button called child. All right. If you remember your HTML, multiple elements can have the same class, right? It allows you to style, just write one style that will affect both of them instead of having to repeat yourself. So you can just give two of them the same class and target them once and for all. Okay, cool. So we got um basically two blocks. We have a div with some children, and let me give this one some text content. Let me call it child div. Okay. Maybe I should style them so that it doesn't look if you look it doesn't look very descriptive. So let me target all parents. Parents. And I want them to have a padding. Let's see. Okay, we should also have a border so it doesn't get so confusing. So, okay, so here is the initial parent. That's the one that's a div, and this is the final parent, the one that is the one that is a. Let me change this. The one that is a paragraph. Let me add some text to this one also. So we've got a button, and then we have the final child of this one is div. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to target all these elements without having to use IDs. Clearly, none of these elements have IDs. So targeting them with IDs is not going to work. So I'm do something like get elements by class name is an array. By saying array, you probably are familiar with that data type. It means more than one element. It will not just return a single element, right? It will return more than one element, and you can loop over that element to do certain things to it. Um, so let's see how it goes. Um, document.get. I think let's target the children. Yeah, I think that's fair enough. Children or child. I think that's the name of the class. This one. So you would find two elements. You will find this one. There's a div that has the text child div, and you also find this button that has the text click me. since both of them have the same class child. So I think I want to save it to a variable. Let's say const something child elements. So okay, maybe my spelling is not accurate. Elements. So child elements. So child elements will not be an array. It will not be a single element, mind you. That's actually important. It does lead a lot of beginners into bugs. It's not a it's not an element that was returned from get elements by class name. Even if a single element is found, it will wrap that element in an array, right? So I don't know how much you know about arrays at this point, but um I'm going to assume that you have some basic understanding of how arrays work at this point. So so I can access this by using square brackets. So I can say child elements O. That is the first element that is returned. I want to, let's say, give it a text value, text content of new content, something like that. And you can see that my div that was once named child div, because this is the first element that will be returned, right? So when you use this to access it, you're accessing the first element, right? So it will access this one that has text child div, and it will, from what I'm doing here, I'm changing the text content from child div to new content. So you can see you now have new content and click me. I could of course access the second one using the square brackets also, and say something like child elements. The second element that is found, change the content to maybe don't click me something, don't click, right? And you can see that it's has changed the text content of that element to don't click, and has changed and this one remains the same child div that it was before, right? So you can do a lot of things. You can actually remove this element. We'll come to that in a moment. Right now we're focusing on targeting. Of course, if you remember your JavaScript array methods, you can loop over them, the elements. You can do something like dot for each. Okay, actually, you cannot do this right. This is a for of loop to loop through them. I mean, content. So you can see I'm able to loop over the child elements that have the class child and change their text content to this is a child. That is, it will target this one and this one, change their text content from what it originally was in my HTML document. So that's that for get elements by class name. So there is another method that we'll talk about real quick, and that is query selector. So query selector maybe is a little slower than get document by ID, but it's really powerful because it allows you to use your CSS selector to target an element just the way that you would have done it in your CSS files. So when you are targeting elements using query selector, in the strings that you pass in, what you pass in is the selector string, so to speak. For example, if you want to target all the parents, I gave all the parents a border, a gray border. Let's say I want to change that border to, let's say, green or something. So Query selector or allows me to do something like this: parent. Oops. Notice I had to, I can't just pass in the class name. I had to put dot. The dot means this is actually a CSS selector, just the way you would do it here. Anything that is a valid CSS selector can go here. That's what you pass into the query selector as arguments. So we've got document the query selector, and I pass in parents. So what this does, parents, what this does is query selector finds the first element that matches the CSS selector that you passed in. So we'd find this one obviously because it's the first element that is a class. We'll explore. I know I told you guys that the query selectors are actually very powerful and flexible. Would explore just how powerful they are in targeting elements that you want to change or modify with your JavaScript. So we could do something obvious. We give it a different border. We go for parent or style. Okay. Seems to have messed something wrong. Okay. So I could append a number of children to it. For example, it already has a child called subparent. Let's say I want to add, let's say, a button or something to it. I could go create a button, right? So whatever first you see that it now has two children, it has the initial children that it has, the ones in your HTML document, and it now has this new button. So my JavaScript here is tantamount to me adding a button here. That's what it basically is doing. New button or whatever. So that's what it actually does when it runs. It adds, it appends. By append, it means it doesn't remove the original children, the existing children. It just adds this one to the bottom, so to speak, right? So when the code runs, this is what you have: new button. You have a button called new button. That's all. So so and you can, similar to what you do with query when what you do with query selector, you can also do query selector or. That's if you want to find, instead of finding the first parent, you want to find all parents, you can do query selector or, and this time you actually get to access all of the elements that has that CSS selector, right? So you can do something like, you can loop through them again for const, let's say elements of, this time you can call this parents so that you actually know is more than, because you will return an array this time. Query selector or will return an array, not a single element. So you can do parents, So elements, or you can just do parents since it's more, it sounds better. So each parent, you just want to add append child. So, and of course, you can change their text content. You can add more text content to it if you want. Um, so I was talking about the power of query selector, or I'm trying to raise, my time is almost up. So what it allows you to do is not just target a single class. You can actually write complex CSS selector strings in there and it will find it for you. What if I want to find a child that is an element to the class child that is inside an element with the class subparent? You can still do that. You can do something like subparent parent child. And when you use query selector or to do this, it will not find these two, since this one is a class, has the class child, but it's not inside a subparent, so it will not find it. But it will find this one because it has the class child and it's inside an element with the class subparent. So so let's see what we find. Let's look to them again. Const parents. Sorry, and you want to do parents. Let's change the. Oh, it's actually not parents this time since they are just basically should be. So let's change it to child. So we want to change all the text content to something new child text. So what we are basically saying is find all the elements that have the class child that are inside an element with the class subparent. This is still the way you target such a child using your CSS. So that's why query selector all is so powerful, because it helps you to actually do that. So obviously this is the only child they will find because it's the only element that matches that uh filter. So let's see. So this one now has new child text, but this one doesn't, despite the fact that it has a class called child. If I want to find both of them, this is what I would do. If you do this, notice that you're not saying find the uh an element with class child that's inside an element with class parent, and both of these elements, that's this one and this one, would match because they both have the class child and they are both descendants of an element with the class parent. So both of them would be found by this query selector or. So see, both of them now have this new text content, new child text, right? So that's basically that. Of course, you can do any query select sorry, any CSS selector you can use in your CSS file. You can also use um inside uh inside the value that you pass into query selector. Or so you can actually use IDs. If you have those in your file, you do something like this: ID, some ID, right? So that's what I mean when I say query selectors are actually quite powerful, because they allow you to target a larger range of elements, right? So that's basically that. So let's finally talk about removing elements before we call it a day. Um, So you can actually remove elements is a thing. Um, let's say I want to find all the elements with, okay, let me do query selector because let's say I want to find the first parent, that is this very one, and I want to remove um all the children, so it doesn't have any children left. The element will still exist, but no children. So of course I could use get elements by class name to still target it, but anyone will work. So so let's do parent, remove. Oh yeah, you actually have to use get element by class name here. You need to remove this dot because this time you are not passing a query string. A query string. You are actually passing in the name of the class and not the CSS selector. So parent, let's use and target the first element being returned. That's this first one. Maybe let's target the second one. Since remember, get elements by class name returns an array, right? So let's target the first one and remove. We want to get rid of this button that says click me. So what we'll do is now that we're targeting the first, sorry, the second element. Remember, this is zero based, so zero is the first and one is the second. Um, so what we'll do is we want to remove child. So so the remove child element actually lives in document. So we'll call document or remove child, and then we'll pass in the element that we want to remove, right? And for us, is this element here, parent, this button inside parent. So let's change the way we're targeting it. Let's go child. Let's change this to query select actually. All right, now this will actually find this child div instead of this. So since both of them are actually have similar names, to differentiate, let me change the name of this to second child. So I could target only this one. Since I just want to remove the button and not remove this child here. Right. So remove child. Pass in child. Okay. Let's be getting- Oh, give me a second. I get to maybe the mistake. All right. So we'll find the child we want to remove using document.getElement by ID, and we'll find the parents that we want to remove it from. Um, Parents document.getElement by ID. Um, what was the ID I gave it? Second parent. Second parent. And when you any element that is returned using getElement by ID has a function called remove child. So that's so you can have a parent, you can call remove child on the parent to get rid of, but you have to ensure that the child that you want to remove actually does have is actually a child of the parent. If not, you get a JavaScript error that the child you're trying to remove is not in fact a child of the parent, and you could easily do that by calling parent the remove child, you passing the child. So when this is run, you see that the parent still exists, but not the child. Um, so we still have this paragraph, but not the button. So I hope this was easy to actually understand. There is a lot more, of course, that the DOM can do for you, but this is where we draw the curtains today. So I will advise you to go a little further and go to maybe say W3 schools, other online resources, actually play with the DOM a bit in your JavaScript code. Uh, Make it a habit to not just console log your maybe answers, actually write it to the DOM, because you need to get used to that. You'll be doing a lot more of it when you start writing production code. Um, so that's it. Good evening, everyone.